Your opinion of me is not the opinion that I have of myself.
And so do I
Quite
need
a bit.
Quite a bit. Oh, so maybe I don't need to restate it. Do you know where you want to hop in or push back, maybe agree? Do you know where you want to start?
You didn't build me, so you can't kill me.
You know, a lot of circumstances, what sometimes get you mentally not.
You know what? God established me.
Deion is expressing a feminine, morally bankrupt worldview.
Why are black quarterbacks still being judged by a different playbook? That's not just a rhetorical question. It's a real issue that exploded into the spotlight the moment two powerful voices clashed, not on the field, but on a podcast. On one side, Jason Whitlock, a veteran sports analyst known for stirring controversy. On the other, Shaun King, a former NFL quarterback who was done staying quiet. At the center of their debate, Deion Sanders and his son, Shaduer, two men leading a cultural shift in football and catching criticism not for how they play the game, but for how they carry themselves while doing it. The controversy? It didn't start with a bad snap, a missed throw, or a losing season. It started with an image, one powerful enough to set the internet on fire. But what started as a single post cracked open a much deeper conversation, one that cuts through race, culture, identity, and the way leadership is judged in America's biggest sport. This wasn't just a sports debate. It became personal, cultural, and unavoidable. Welcome to the moment what happened, and why this fight might just rewrite the rules. It all started with a single image.
Public enemy number one and police bars for Shedeur and Coach Deion is extremely unfair, Jason. As much as we may disagree.
That's public enemy to rappers. They're iconic rappers, rebels without a cause. What are we doing? I can't do that.
You have prison bars and you got public enemy number
Blame
one.
Chuck D and Flavor Flav.
There are a lot of other entities in our communities that are more deadly and dangerous to people than Shedeur and Coach Brian.
You ain't make me, so you can't break me.
I've been this way. So this is God showing a lot of people who I am.
Jason Whitlock, never shy about pushing buttons, posted a graphic that instantly turned heads and turned up the volume on an already heated national conversation. The image compared Shaduer Sanders and his father, Deion Sanders, Coach Prime himself, to the iconic cover of Public Enemy's album, It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back. But this wasn't just a reference to old-school hip-hop culture. It was reimagined. Whitlock's version featured crosshairs over their pictures and prison bars closing in around them. The message was loud and loaded. It wasn't just metaphor, it looked like a warning. The reaction was immediate. Shaun King didn't hesitate. The former NFL quarterback jumped into the fire and went straight at Whitlock, calling the graphic exactly what it looked like to him: reckless, inflammatory, irresponsible, and way out of bounds. And not just because the image was harsh. Because it meant something deeper, something more dangerous. An attack not just on two figures in college football, but on what they represent. For King, this wasn't social media theater. This wasn't just about a meme. It was about a mindset. Because when you take a rising college quarterback and his Hall of Fame father, two men coaching, mentoring, creating opportunities for young black athletes, and frame them using prison imagery, that's not critique, that's branding. And that branding carries weight.
And for black athletes, my argument is like, hey man, football, particularly at the quarterback position, but football in general, because of its military-like structure, it's about submission. It's about submitting to the head coach, and the team is greater than yourself. And hip hop is about individuality and being rebellious to authority. Shaun King, I don't know how much of my rant here you got to hear.
With jail cell bars. It's a little extreme. Yes, it's a little extreme.
It's an analogy about an iconic rap cover album.
The visual representation is a little extreme.
See, Public Enemy didn't randomly slap prison bars on their album cover just for aesthetic. That group was resistance. They were revolution. Their music was about survival, about speaking openly about police brutality, injustice, and inequality. They weren't glorifying criminality. They were pushing back against a system that made blackness criminal before a single crime was committed. So when Whitlock repurposed that image, he wasn't just making an edgy pop culture reference. He was assigning a narrative, and Shaun King knew it. This wasn't about football, player development, or scheme analysis. This was about making loud, unapologetic Black confidence seem dangerous, about framing swagger as threatening, about using cultural shorthand to say, these guys don't belong. But Whitlock didn't back off. In fact, he leaned in harder. He
mentally not in your best place, you know? And you gotta find your happy place. You gotta find that it for you.
And he's passing it off as confidence and a false bravado.
So that's where you want to start. All right.
Well, that's the first thing I saw when I came on. Because I rock with you because you're one of the few people that look like me that's not afraid to give your own opinion and stand on what you believe in, even if it goes against the grain. It's a bridge that we probably shouldn't cross. The representation of this, to me, is not realistically connected to these two young men. What they did, Jason, was they took the most powerful entity in America and utilized it to market themselves.
defended the imagery as a statement. Football, especially the quarterback position, is supposed to be structured, disciplined, military-like. In Whitlock's worldview, football demands obedience, submission, and order, and hip-hop is rebellion. And that contradiction, he argued, explains why Black quarterbacks struggle to succeed. That claim was a lot, because in that one sentence, football is submission, hip-hop is rebellion, Whitlock said the quiet part out loud. He blew open a belief structure that still sits inside locker rooms, meeting rooms, media studios, and front offices all over the league. Not just that confidence needs to be earned, but that it needs to look a certain way, talk a certain way, be housed in the right kind of body. And most importantly, be quiet. Shaun King didn't just disagree with the take, he dismantled it. He brought context that Whitlock ignored. Hip-hop, King said, isn't rebellion anymore. It's not a fringe movement waving from the outside looking in. Hip-hop is merged with American culture. It's in TikTok dances, Super Bowl halftime shows, Gatorade commercials, locker room playlists, and even presidential campaigns. White kids in suburbs perform to it. Grandmas in diners know the lyrics. Coaches use it to recruit. So if everyone's consuming it, celebrating it, leveraging it, how is it a threat only when it's coming from a confident Black quarterback? That question hit hard, because we've all seen what King was pointing out. Jackson Dart wears diamond chains and gets praised for swagger. JJ McCarthy dances, flexes, talks trash, and he's fiery. When Shaduer celebrates or posts a flashy highlight reel, critics say he's arrogant, unfocused, maybe even immature. Same behavior. Different outcomes. Why? The answer isn't in the stats or the highlight reels. It's in perception, in comfort levels, in the quiet, coded expectations of what a quarterback is allowed to be. Shaun King wasn't applauding bad behavior. He was questioning why confidence is repackaged as a red flag, depending on the field. He watched young Black talent erase individuality just to be tolerated. He knew what the system asked for, not leadership, but quiet obedience. Don't wear too many chains. Don't post too boldly online. Don't look too loud. That's why Whitlock's image and message cut so deeply, because it restated something that too many people still believe, that being Black at quarterback means you're already on thin ice. And that's where this whole debate shifted from internet scuffle to cultural moment. Because now this wasn't about Whitlock versus King. It was about whose personality is allowed to shine at the most visible position in sports, and why some players get a pass while others get a label. So when Shaun King stepped in, it wasn't just to defend Deion and Shaduer Sanders. It was to defend the right of Black athletes to show up fully as themselves and still be taken seriously. Whitlock's argument wasn't just about culture, it was about control. He claimed the quarterback position demands a mindset rooted in discipline, hierarchy, and one word he repeated more than once: submission. That wasn't casual phrasing. He was drawing a hard line. According to his reasoning, football, especially the quarterback role, functions like the military. You don't lead by standing out. You lead by falling in line. And in his view, hip-hop doesn't fit that equation. He labeled it rebellious, individualistic, disruptive to structure, dangerous to order. When he looked at the Sanders family, he saw image, branding, bravado, and instantly defined that as evidence of a problem, not a plan. It was a convenient conclusion. But it also ignored one reality. The version of hip-hop he was pointing at doesn't exist in some underground, anti-establishment corner anymore. That culture? It is the culture now. Shaun King didn't just dispute Whitlock's take, he ripped the entire foundation out from under it. He didn't do it with big emotions or personal attacks. He did it with facts, with context, with clarity. He pointed out the obvious. You can't argue that hip-hop and quarterbacking can't coexist when literally everything around the sport is drenched in that same culture. College recruiting thrives on personal brands. Nil deals don't reward silence, they reward uniqueness. Celebration no longer lives on the sideline. It's on TikTok, on your phone minutes later, and in every post-game edit teams put out. These aren't displays of rebellion. They're how modern sports are marketed, how loyalty is built, how fan bases grow. And more importantly, that swagger everyone critiques coming from athletes like Shaduer, it's not exclusive to race or rebellion, it's everywhere. But when it's worn by the right person, it's charming. That double standard, it's not subtle. It's baked into headlines, commentary, and shade that doesn't even try to hide. Just ask yourself, why does confidence look like leadership on one quarterback and like arrogance on another? People watched Baker Mayfield plant a flag at midfield in college and cheered. They heard him clap back at critics in press conferences and called it passion. They watched him scream with his teammates and praised his fire. But when Lamar Jackson smiles after a touchdown or Kyler Murray flashes a style that isn't watered down and media-friendly, there's suddenly a problem. The questions get loaded real fast. Is he mature enough? Can he handle the pressure? Is he disciplined enough to lead a team? Same spotlight, different microscope. Whitlock framed his criticism as tough love, as a commentary on what it takes to win. But Shaun King wasn't having it. Because behind that football purity argument was a deeper implication. That to be successful in this league, you have to play a part. You have to flatten your personality, dim your shine, be digestible to those who still run the rooms, especially if you're black. But the truth is, that system isn't sacred. It's just old. The quarterback archetype Whitlock was defending is already dead to this generation. It's just that some people haven't accepted the funeral yet. Shaun King knew this because he lived this, and he wasn't speaking in hypotheticals. He had worn the helmet, taken the hits, watched the invisible rules get enforced. He had seen how pressure didn't just come from reading coverages, it came from reading rooms where no one looked like you and where a raised eyebrow could decide whether you got the benefit of the doubt or the back of the bench. That's why the conversation wasn't really about Shaduer or Deion. It was about the fight between two versions of what football leadership looks like. The old school prototype versus the modern expression. The quiet soldier versus the visible, branded commander. Whitlock's worldview had no room for both. Shaun King's did. That's the real divide. We're in an era where quarterbacks aren't just playing the game. They're expected to own their brand, lead on social media, navigate endorsement deals, build fans, win games, and post a highlight clip before the locker room even clears. The rules are already changed. The expectations are already different. And yet somehow the judgment hasn't caught up. Confidence used to come in one package, tall, stoic, emotionless, and easy to praise. Now confidence has a voice. It has a playlist. It comes with fitted suits, interviews done in sunglasses, pre-game outfits that get more views than the actual score. And here's the truth no one wants to say out loud. Some people just aren't ready to call that leadership when it doesn't look like something they're used to. That's why Shaun King pushed back so hard. Not because everyone in the Sanders family is perfect. Not because he thinks Shaduer never made a mistake, but because the conversation wasn't really about success or talent. It was about permission. Who's allowed to be themselves and still be taken seriously? And according to the old metrics, Shaduer Sanders never had that permission to begin with. The more you look at it, the clearer it becomes, this isn't just about performance. This is about perception. And for black quarterbacks, the standard doesn't just shift, it splits wide open. Shaun King knew it, and he wasn't afraid to say it out loud. He pointed out a contradiction that's been hiding in plain sight for years. Turn on any sports network. Scroll through the NFL's official social feeds. What do you see? Guys like Jackson Dart rocking diamond chains? That's cool, that's drip. That's swagger. JJ McCarthy celebrates with his teammates. He's got moxie. He's passionate. He's a natural leader. But the moment Shaduer Sanders shows up with the same edge, the same energy, suddenly it's a discussion about ego, arrogance, a lack of humility. Now it's a question of whether he can even lead grown men. Same behavior, same vibe, completely different reception, and it's not subtle. Lamar Jackson wears a grill in his mouth. Media outlets treat it like it's a cause for concern. Is he mature enough? Is he professional? Meanwhile, white quarterbacks bring the same swagger and they're praised for it. He's got ice in his veins. He's got that winner's mentality. The language change is quiet, but it's powerful, and it happens all The time, Shaun King didn't let it slide. He put the truth front and center. There's a double standard in how quarterbacks are judged, especially when confidence doesn't come in a quiet, buttoned-up package. And when Jason Whitlock tried to brush it off, when he claimed he doesn't praise Jackson Dart for swagger, King hit back with something even more important. He pointed out that it's not about what he thinks personally. It's about the broader pattern. The coverage, the narrative, the culture. Because most of the sports media does hype those traits when it's convenient, when it fits the comfort zone, when the quarterback delivering it doesn't force people to rethink their idea of leadership. That contradiction sat in plain sight, and for once, someone called it out for what it is. The way confidence is labeled isn't about facts, it's about framing. It's about who's allowed to be visible and who's expected to shrink just to avoid backlash. When Tom Brady used to scream at teammates on the sideline, break tablets, and demand excellence, he was a competitor, a perfectionist, one of the greats. People made memes out of it and celebrated the fire. But let Cam Newton walk into a press conference with style, with attitude, with unapologetic energy, here come the headlines. Distraction, immaturity, not focused. Shaun King wasn't just pointing fingers, he was holding up a mirror to the entire system. And what it revealed was uncomfortable. Visibility isn't the problem, where it comes from is. And the moment that confidence wears black skin, becomes wrapped in cultural expression, or refuses to get sanded down into something safer, it's no longer confidence anymore. It becomes threatening. It gets framed as rebellion. That's why this debate around Shaduer Sanders spiraled the way it did. People weren't reacting to a stat line or a bad game. They were reacting to audacity, to visibility. The fact that he called himself legendary before ever playing an NFL snap, that became the story. Not his numbers, not his development. The idea of him believing in himself became too much for some to take. But here's the irony of it all, swagger has always existed at the quarterback position. Troy Aikman had it. Joe Namath invented it. Brett Favre used to make wild decisions and still got the gunslinger label attached like a badge of honor. Aaron Rodgers came into the league with a chip on his shoulder and a reputation for being hard to coach, and now he's considered one of the smartest to ever play the game. And let's not pretend those guys didn't have attitudes. They weren't robots. They believed in themselves. They talked trash. They were bold. They moved like stars and were celebrated like icons. So the idea that a quarterback needs to be silent, submissive, or grateful just to be here, that's not truth. That's training. And it's a training that's only ever been forced on certain guys. Shaun King laid it out clearly. The standard doesn't fit. It changes shape depending on who's being judged. And too often, for black quarterbacks, it becomes about more than football. People aren't just measuring mechanics or decision-making, they're measuring presence, personality, even posture. It's never just about what you do anymore. It's about how you carry it. That's the weight Shaduer Sanders walks in with. Not just the pressure to perform, but the pressure to be perfect, palatable, and quiet on command. Only problem is, he's not playing that game, and maybe that's what makes people nervous. Because when a quarterback who doesn't fit the mold refuses to ask for permission, the system doesn't know how to process it. So instead, it labels him dangerous, disrespectful, arrogant. All the while, others get the benefit of the doubt just for looking the part. That's not accountability. That's bias with a jersey on. A lot of people act like the league evolved on its own. Like the rise of dual-threat quarterbacks and expressive leaders was all part of a natural, welcoming embrace. But Shaun King made something clear, it wasn't. Back in 1999, when he entered the NFL alongside Donovan McNabb, Daunt Culpepper, and others from that black quarterback surge, the league didn't change because it suddenly became progressive. It changed because it had no choice. College football forced the NFL's hand. For years, the NFL had a mold, a formula, a specific look and feel for what the quarterback should be: tall, white, polished, quiet, coachable in a way that meant predictable. Anything outside of that made decision makers uncomfortable. Mobile quarterbacks were considered athletes, not leaders. Quarterbacks with visible swagger were considered distractions. Even the terminology told a story. Code words like raw, immature, or high risk were often just placeholders for "we don't get this guy." But something happened in the late 90s and early 2000s. College football stopped listening. The Saturday game became creative, wild, dangerous. It didn't care how NFL-ready a quarterback looked, it just cared whether they could win. Spread offenses, run pass options, pocket movement, dual threat playmakers. They were putting up video game numbers, filling stadiums, breaking coverage. And most of those quarterbacks, they didn't look anything like the ones the NFL was used to. So eventually, the NFL had to adjust. It couldn't ignore the film, couldn't ignore the talent pipeline. It wasn't about progress, it was survival. The old guard realized one thing: adapt or start falling behind. But while the play calling eventually shifted, the mindset didn't fully come with it. Even now, the system still tries to quietly control who a quarterback is allowed to be. It teaches them how to act at press conferences, what not to say in interviews, how to sit in the pocket and in the spotlight without making anyone nervous. And for black quarterbacks, that leash is shorter, the rules tighter, and the exit door comes faster. Shaun King lived through that switch. He watched how black quarterbacks were praised for athleticism, but rarely for intelligence. They were celebrated once they won, but blamed instantly if they lost. He saw how being too loud, too flashy, or too confident could get you labeled too much. So when Jason Whitlock demanded submission, King heard the subtext. That word, submission, meant something specific. It wasn't about following a playbook. It was about playing small, fitting into a box, stripping everything away that made you different, unique, or visible. And if you did, the system was quick to say, "You're not ready." But here's the funny thing: every quarterback is a package deal. They all show up with a personality, a mindset, confidence that borders on cockiness. It's part of the DNA, whether people say it out loud or not. You have to believe you're elite to even survive that position. You can't lead a huddle without that edge. The myth that quarterbacks have to be robotic to be great, that's just fear disguised as tradition. Look at Brady, Rodgers, Manning. These weren't background characters. They were intense, calculated, expressive, and often difficult. Peyton Manning was accused of being too detached, too mechanical. Favre was wild and reckless. Rodgers, still branded arrogant even while winning MVPs. Every one of them carried their ego onto the field, and it worked. So why is it only a problem when the confidence comes in a different package? That's what Shaun King kept pressing. The NFL doesn't care about emotion. It cares about control. And the second you present yourself in a way that can't be managed or misunderstood, it sends a signal: tone it down or we'll tune you out. That's the space Shaduer Sanders walked into before ever playing a down. He didn't call himself humble. He called himself legendary. He didn't wait for comparisons. He made them himself. That rubbed people the wrong way. It felt like skipping steps. But even that reaction says more about the audience than it does about the player. Because the truth is, confidence only becomes arrogance when people don't think you've earned it. And when you're a young black quarterback, that runway is shorter than anyone else's. Shaun King never said Shaduer was perfect. He admitted that projecting greatness too early can make things harder. It limits who's willing to vouch for you. It reduces patience after mistakes. It sharpens every lens you're viewed through. But even with all that, he still drew a line. It's one thing to challenge performance. It's another to attack identity. And when you label culture, confidence, and visibility as liabilities, not traits, it becomes clear. The league may have updated its schemes, but it hasn't updated its expectations. Quarterbacks who don't just call plays, they shift narratives. Who don't hide personality, they lead with it. Who know the business, leverage the spotlight, and won't shrink just to make the moment more comfortable for everyone watching. The future isn't quiet, it's visible, and people are either going to adjust or get left behind. People love to accuse the Sanders family of stirring the pot, of bringing attention just to feed the spotlight. But what they don't realize is, attention isn't a side effect of what they do. It's the strategy. They didn't stumble into headlines. They built the storyline on purpose. That's not rebellion, that's media fluency. Shaun King was one of the first to say it plainly. Deion and Shaduer didn't hustle their way into this moment by ignoring the rules. They just studied the game everyone else was playing, and played it better. And let's be clear, this wasn't built on hype. Deion Sanders didn't walk into Jackson State with Instagram quotes and blinding charisma alone. He turned it into a winning program almost overnight. He recruited, he developed, he changed the conversation on Twitter and pulling eyes from across the country. That's impact. And his QB, his son, he didn't just ride the wave, he helped create it. Shaduer wasn't just out here throwing passes. He was throwing 500-yard games, running 2-minute drills like a pro, giving Colorado energy they hadn't felt in decades. But for some reason, that wasn't enough. For some people, the problem wasn't about performance. It was about posture. It was about the shades, the cars, the watch flex. The legendary quote, "It wasn't what they did, it's how they did it." And here's the truth no one ever wants to say. Visibility comes with a tax if you're black and confident. And especially if your last name is Sanders. Whitlock and others framed it like theater. Like Coach Prime and Shaduer are more focused on cameras than conditioning. But what they missed entirely is that media training isn't a distraction anymore, it's required. Name one elite program in the country right now that isn't managing brand, nil deals, digital identity, and recruiting optics. You think Nick Saban isn't a master of media. You think Georgia and Ohio State aren't leveraging every second of exposure they can get. The only difference is Deion does it without pretending. He leans into it. He speaks the language. And the moment he did it boldly, loud, and unapologetically, the old guard started throwing up flags. And Shaduer? He speaks with digital fluency this league still doesn't know how to handle. He knows how to market, how to control narratives, how to live in the ecosystem where most players eventually drown, not the playbook, but the press. And instead of being praised for that awareness, he's getting attacked for confidence that doesn't fit the grind in silence image some are still forcing onto quarterbacks who look like him. But here's where Shaun King dropped the hammer. This family isn't reckless. They're calculated. They're business people who understand modern influence. They didn't break rules. They just mastered the ones that most people refuse to acknowledge even exist. Look around. Influence wins. Visibility fuels opportunity. Nil money doesn't go to invisible athletes. Endorsements don't get handed out to people waiting quietly in the back row. If you want power now, you better know how to own your name. So when Whitlock accuses them of promoting rebellion over responsibility, he's missing the point completely. This isn't rebellion. It's leverage. This isn't chaos. It's control. That's what made people uneasy. Not that Shaduer was too wild, too arrogant, or too cocky, but that he knew exactly what he was doing and didn't ask for permission while doing it. He was winning the branding game out loud, and that rattled a system that still prefers its quarterback to be unforgettable on Sunday and invisible every other day of the week. And let's not act like this is new. Quarterbacks have been using confidence as currency forever. They've just been allowed to do it quietly, behind closed doors with the approval of those who wrote the playbook. Shaduer just ripped the cover off the whole operation. He didn't do it by accident. He knew the cameras were there. He looked at the lens and didn't blink. That's what disturbed the critics. Not his play, but his clarity. Visibility isn't the crime. Ownership is. They weren't supposed to own this moment. Not with this much flash. Not with this much freedom. Not this loud. But they do. And that's why the backlash came in waves. Because some people don't hate the noise, they hate who's making it and winning at the same time. The NFL loves to talk about leadership. Every draft season, it becomes one of the most used words in scouting reports and media rundowns. Can he lead a locker room? Can he command respect? Those questions get asked like there's one golden standard, one profile the league is looking for. But here's the uncomfortable truth. That standard isn't just about leadership. It's about fitting a mold, about looking the part, sounding the part, acting like the hundreds who came before you. And for quarterbacks who bring their full personality to the job, especially black quarterbacks, that mold was never made for them in the first place. Shaun King saw it years ago. The league wanted talent, sure, but only if it came in the right packaging. Be confident, but not too confident. Be fiery, but not flashy. Be smart, but don't be a know-it-all. Stay visible, but make sure it's in ways that make coaches, owners, and fans comfortable. Whitlock was pushing this same conditioning, trying to frame Shaduer Sanders' behavior not as personality, but as rebellion. And the way he laid out his argument made it clear. True quarterbacks submit. They align. They soften their edge for the team. They mute their culture. They tuck it in behind a face mask and play nice during pressers. Shaun King wasn't buying that narrative, because hiding who you are doesn't equal leadership. It equals erasure. And over the years, that's exactly what many black quarterbacks were forced to do, shrink themselves just to be tolerated. Not praised, not championed, just tolerated. But Deion Sanders never played that game, and neither does his son. That's the real issue here. Shaduer Sanders isn't failing any leadership test. He's just not following the script that's been used to control quarterback identity for decades. And that rejection of the script, that is what some critics can't stand. Because when leadership doesn't come in the approved format, it suddenly becomes controversial. Shaduer calls himself legendary. It's arrogance. He wears designer watches and drives a Rolls. He's too focused on image. He posts confidently on social. He's not mature enough to lead grown men. Meanwhile, quarterbacks like Joe Burrow show up in flashy pregame fits, talk with just as much confidence, and get labeled Joe Cool, an icon in the making. Why is presence praised in one case and penalized in another? Why does a white quarterback with swagger get labeled a killer, a gamer, a future franchise face, while a black quarterback with the same energy gets questioned? It can't be about the job description. The tape doesn't lie. The numbers speak for themselves. The moments of brilliance are there. But somehow, the conversation keeps drifting away from the field and toward behavior, personality, intangibles. The same overused package that protects some and punishes others. That's where King's insight hit hardest. He wasn't saying quarterbacks shouldn't be coached hard. He wasn't saying every player who talks loud should get a free pass. He was saying the rules need to be applied evenly. That the standard can't change depending on the color of the quarterback, the sound of his voice, or the rhythm in his walk. That's leadership, too, being authentic and accountable, bringing personality and discipline. Understanding how to own a moment without shrinking into the mold others think is safe. Quarterbacks, real ones, have never been fragile. They've been bold, loud when needed, resilient when shaken. They made decisions that weren't always popular because that's part of the pressure. That's part of the weight. And yet, even with all that history, black quarterbacks are still expected to carry it differently, more carefully, more quietly. The truth is, leadership in the NFL has never been just about football. It's about perception. Meanwhile, media narratives quietly shape who fans trust and who they feel uncertain about. Some quarterbacks are handed benefit of the doubt grace from day one. Others, they have to pry it out of tightly clenched fists. That's what King called out with clarity and courage. He made it clear that this generation of quarterbacks, especially those coached by people like Deion, are being trained to lead in an entirely different world. A digital world. A brand-heavy, camera-always-on reality where personality is part of performance. Not a distraction, but a tool. Not arrogance, but marketing. Understanding attention, how it moves, and how it builds leverage isn't some side hustle for today's athletes. It's survival. And yet, when black quarterbacks do it confidently, openly, effectively, suddenly it's not savvy, it's selfish. Suddenly, the bar moves again. That's why the image Whitlock shared hit like it did. Because it wasn't just a graphic, it was a symbol of everything King had been dismantling. The way visibility, when paired with blackness, too often gets repackaged as a threat. And this is where the question becomes bigger than Shaduer. It's not just, is he ready for the NFL? It's, is the NFL ready for quarterbacks like him? Not just skilled, but seen, not just prepared, but present, not just successful, but unapologetically themselves. The league's future is already filled with these players, branded, expressive, confident, and media-aware. If the system doesn't adapt, it's not going to hold them back. It's going to get passed by. Because the truth is, leadership isn't one size fits all, not anymore, and maybe it never should have been. The harshest reality in football isn't how physically demanding the game is, it's how few people are willing to give a black quarterback any room to grow. Shaun King said it directly. You can't walk into the NFL as a young, brash, unapologetic black quarterback expecting grace. Because once you claim the spotlight, once you say out loud that you're that dude, people start rooting for you to fall. That might not be fair, but it's real. And Shaduer Sanders is living it in real time. It all came down to one word: legendary. That's what he called himself. Not potential, not up and coming. Legendary, before a single NFL snap. And that one label lit the fuse. Critics pounced. They didn't want to break down the film, they wanted to break down the attitude. Because the message wasn't just, he said too much. It was, he hasn't earned the right to say that. And here's where the conversation cracked wide open. Because what exactly does it mean to earn that right? We've seen white quarterbacks walk into the league with swagger. Josh Rosen said there were 9 mistakes ahead of him on draft night, confidence boosted to 100. Baker Mayfield threw shade, planted flags, and danced on Alabama logos. Analysts didn't destroy them, they called it fire. But when Shaduer voices self-belief with the same clarity, the room goes quiet and then hostile. Not because his confidence is that out of line, but because he said it too early. That's the trap. For black quarterbacks, confidence has to be calculated. Swagger has to be slow released. Show too much of it before the league decides you've proved yourself. It's not just unpopular, it's career-threatening. Because that perception, that early discomfort, sets the tone for how long teams will be patient with you. Shaun King saw it decades ago. His class, Donovan McNabb, Daunt Culpepper, Achilles Smith, Michael Bishop, they didn't have the luxury of image. They had to keep their heads down, earn trust silently, and maybe after years of production, carve out space for identity. That was the exchange. But college football changed. NIL changed it. Personal branding changed it. Athletes now come with followers, highlight tapes, and reputations before they hit the league. And for many of them, image and opportunity go hand in hand. You build the buzz to get the looks. You post the clips because scouts do see them. And that's where King drew the line again. He wasn't saying Shaduer was wrong for being confident, but he was saying that confidence comes at a higher price if you flash it too early. That cost? Patience. Time. Grace. Because when you walk in with the belief that you're the answer, people don't give you time to figure things out. They expect immediate dividends. No dropped throws, no slow reads, no rookie mistakes, and if you stumble. There's no wide net to catch you, no warm take from analysts saying, he just needs to settle in. No front office whispering, he's young, let him grow. There's just silence, or worse, anger, because the unspoken rule has always hovered. Confidence buys you media love only if it comes after their approval, not yours. And what King made painfully clear is that the league doesn't just grade performance, it grades humility. It observes posture. And if you walk in like you already know your worth, you're seen as a problem, not a project. That's the contradiction that players like Shaduer face every step of the way. The fans want entertainment. The media wants storylines. The game wants emotion. But when a confident black quarterback delivers all three, he gets reevaluated. Now swagger's an issue. Now passion is selfish. Now branding is a distraction. But there's another layer, the unforgiving pace of the league. A quarterback is expected to lead grown men, win a locker room, digest complex systems, and learn to stay poised no matter what pressure hits. It's not just a job, it's a mental marathon. And when people have already decided they don't like your style, your chances start shrinking before you've even thrown your first pick. That's why Shaun King's warning wasn't criticism, it was mentorship. A hand extended back to the next generation saying, you have every right to be who you are, but know the system you're stepping into. Because too many immensely talented quarterbacks have lost starting spots, not for lack of skill, but for not fitting. For not being quiet long enough, humble enough, grateful enough, safe enough. King wasn't tearing Shaduer down, he was aiming higher. If confidence is your brand, it has to be backed by over-preparation, discipline, focus. Not because that's what every quarterback needs, but because it's what others need in you to believe you can succeed. It's not fair, it's just true. And that's why leadership for black quarterbacks often means something very few people talk about. It's not just guiding teammates, it's guiding first impressions. It's leading the media away from easy narratives. It's taking control of the microscope before that microscope buries you. That's the pressure Shaduer's walking into, already under more scrutiny. Already given less room to fail, and already facing a league that tunes out boldness unless it's been pre-approved by winning percentages. So when people say, he's got to earn it, they never say how, or how much more earning is required when you start from a position many don't even believe you should have. Because the question isn't just whether the game tests you, it's who gets tested harder. This was never just about Shaduer Sanders. That's the part people keep missing. It's not just one quarterback under fire or one father-son duo being misunderstood. It's not just a football debate or even a cultural clash between two commentators. This is a test case, a litmus test for the entire league and maybe even for the country's most popular sport. Because whether people realize it or not, this moment is forcing a bigger question into the open. Can the NFL actually keep up with its own evolution? Because the talent has already changed. The branding has changed. The culture, the language, the locker room vibe, it's already moved forward. But we're still seeing the same tired narratives, the same old expectations, the same scrutiny dressed up as concerns. Every year, new players enter the league sharper, savvier, more connected to their identity, and more aware of their influence. And the system keeps asking them to behave like it's still 2002. And here's the truth that makes a lot of old-school minds uncomfortable. The quarterback of the present doesn't look like the quarterback of the past. He's louder, smarter, brand-aware, culturally fluent. He's not just throwing touchdowns. He's commanding rooms, growing nil deals, building followings, and refusing to separate who he is from how he leads. But for some reason, only certain quarterbacks are allowed to do that without sparking a debate about whether their personality is a distraction. That's not about football. That's about comfort. And that's the line Shaun King kept hammering. Football doesn't suffer from confidence, visibility, or culture. It suffers from judgment that gets more narrow the moment the person leading the huddle doesn't fit a familiar mold. When swagger comes in a way people aren't used to, they call it selfish. When leadership doesn't look militarized and calm, they call it immature. And when a quarterback proudly wears his background, his roots, his identity on his sleeve, they call it dangerous. Dangerous to what, though? Because let's be honest, the results don't lie. Patrick Mahomes is expressive, visible, emotional, and loud, and he's the face of the league. Lamar Jackson plays with passion, smiles while dancing on the field, and has won 2 MVPs before turning 30. These aren't players succeeding despite who they are. They're succeeding because they embraced every part of what makes them different. And still, the pushback exists. Still, people question if leadership can really come from someone who celebrates, who wears grills, who dances on camera, who talks big before the national media hands them the crown. Still, we hear that loaded phrase, he needs to learn how to lead a grown man's locker room. Translation, he needs to tone himself down. But why is leadership still considered valid only when it looks humble, quiet, textbook? Maybe it's time to stop asking players to fit into outdated ideologies and start asking questions about the systems and gatekeepers who built those ideologies in the first place. That's what made this confrontation between King and Whitlock necessary. Not enjoyable, not easy, but necessary. Because football isn't just being played differently now, it's being lived differently. And you can only suppress identity for so long before talented players start asking, why should I have to? This isn't about letting ego run wild or ignoring the discipline required to thrive at QB. It's about making space for real leadership to come in different forms. It's about trusting that confidence isn't a threat. It's a fuel if you channel it right. And it's about giving young players the room to develop without forcing them to bring a filtered version of themselves into every interview, every meeting, every snap. Shaduer Sanders may have said too much too soon. He may have flashed a little early. But that doesn't mean he's wrong for showing up the way he did. It means he's part of a generation that refuses to play small in a system that often demands it. That's unsettling for some, but it's also the future. Because whether Whitlock accepts it or not, the next crop of quarterbacks doesn't just want to throw. They want to talk. They want to be seen. They want to lead in the film room and on Instagram. They want to win games while winning culture. They're not looking for the league's permission to express themselves. They're expecting the league to catch up. And if it does, it won't be the players who fail. It'll be the system that never gave them a fair chance to thrive in the first place. This was never a story about one post, one clash, one quarterback. It's a mirror reflecting how far football has come and how far it still has to go. Shaduer Sanders isn't asking for excuses. He's not ducking pressure. He's walking into the same NFL everyone else walks into, just with a louder spotlight, a shorter leash, and a whole lot more people waiting for him to fail. Not because he can't play, but because he won't shrink. Because he walks in as himself before the league decided it was okay. That's the real issue. It's not about touchdowns or interviews or watches or words. It's about space. Who's allowed to take up space? Who's allowed to own their image without being labeled a problem? Who gets patience when they're learning, and who gets branded before they even gear up? These aren't soft questions. They're the questions that decide careers before the film ever rolls. The NFL has a decision to make, and it's already behind schedule, because the game on the field is faster, more creative, and more expressive than it's ever been. The players shaping that future aren't waiting for permission to show up. They don't operate in silence. They don't hide. They know how to lead, how to market, how to connect, and that doesn't weaken their ability to win. It strengthens it. Swagger is not a crime. Culture is not a problem. And confidence, when rooted in work, preparation, and purpose, isn't arrogance. It's how change shows up. Loud, visible, and impossible to ignore. This was never about protecting Shaduer Sanders. He doesn't need defending. It's about making sure the next Shaduer doesn't have to climb through the same narrative minefields just to be seen as capable. It's about asking why leadership still only looks one way and who benefits from keeping it that way. And it's about confronting the parts of football culture that demand authenticity from players while punishing them the moment they show it. The Sanders family isn't perfect. No one is. But they've built programs, inspired players, and proven that belief in yourself is never what holds a quarterback back. But public discomfort, biased evaluation, that still does. So if you're still asking whether Shaduer Sanders will make it in the NFL, you're asking the wrong question. The real question is, can the NFL finally grow into the version of the game its most talented players are already leading? The future of football is here. Whether the system is ready for it or not, some QBs are done trying to fit in. They're ready to build what comes next.